What is happiness? Philosophers have been mulling over this question for hundreds of thousands of years, and they're not going to stop soon. Happiness, at first, seems to be an incredibly simple, linear concept. Like, when I'm happy, I feel good. The shirt I bought makes me happy. But when one tries to define it in real specific terms, it gets a little bit tricky. How can happiness be measured? How has happiness changed throughout history? Can one truly be happy? You get the point. But before we get too ahead of ourselves, let's break down the school of thought that this all comes from. Philosophy. Philosophy is one of the oldest studies, tracing back to 600 BCE and probably and most definitely earlier. But what is it? Is it just a bunch of guys sitting around on stones pondering about things that mean literally nothing? Philosophy, in my definition, is the attempt to make the incomprehensible comprehensible. Just to answer some basic questions, like why are we alive? Why do things exist? Are we even real? That is definitely one question that gets a lot of attention in the study of philosophy. Are we real? The answer to this question is intangible. It can never have a right answer because real can't be defined, similar to almost everything else in philosophy. The most famous answer to this question goes as follows: I think, therefore I am. This was said by René Descartes, a 17th century mathematician, scientist, and of course, philosopher. The answer is ambiguous, to say the least, but we can actually derive a lot of meaning and thought behind these 5 simple words. The human can think. There are complex processes that exist within the brain that allow us to make conscious, informed decisions. These decisions won't necessarily benefit us in the short term, but help us with our long-term well-being, establishing critical thought and reason. These complex processes that we exhibit that aren't just instincts must be proof that we in fact exist. At least that is the thought by René Descartes. That's the whole basis of that whole quote. Now that we've broken down what philosophy is and what it looks like, let's get back to the original question. What is happiness? Aristotle, Plato, and Socrates, also known as the Big Three of Greek philosophy. I'm sure you've heard these 3 names before, but you don't know much about them. And that's completely fair because they existed 2,000 years ago, and we live right now, not 2,000 years ago. Socrates, born first in 470 BCE, is the non-official founder of Western philosophy. He believed that a moral life would grant happiness rather than an immoral life. So living by virtue rather than by pure pleasure. Plato, born between 428 and 423 BCE, built upon the ideas of Socrates and even wrote dialogues between him and himself to preserve Socrates' knowledge and wisdom. Plato actually built an academy of sorts for people to study at on the outskirts of Athens. He once said, "For the man who makes everything that leads to happiness, or near to it, to depend upon himself and not upon other men, this is the man of manly character and wisdom." Aristotle, who studied at Plato's academy, shared very similar views to his predecessors. He wrote in his work, Nicomachean Ethics, that the saying that no one is voluntarily wicked nor involuntarily happy seems to be partly false and partly true, for no one is involuntarily happy, but wickedness is voluntary. From this, we can see that Aristotle thought that being happiness was a choice of sorts, along with being wicked. All of these philosophers believe that living virtuously, leading a moral life, was the key to happiness. This kind of thinking is also called Stoicism. The belief that living virtuously, thinking what's best for humans, and then living according to that will grant happiness. Next up, existentialism. It can help to think of this one as a sort of radical atheism. During World War II, existentialism started to emerge as a new thinking among all the mass destruction, the Nazi death camps and the atomic bombs. It was the result of philosophers questioning if we were to exist just to cause our own self-destruction. Existentialists believe that humans cause their own purpose or make it up. They believe that no external factors are required to produce meaning and happiness. They believe in existence before essence, essence being purpose or reason or anything of that sort. They believe that this was created without a purpose. So their definition of happiness is that you get to choose the definition of happiness. Happiness is what you make of it. Existentialism also draws many parallels to nihilism. The key difference between these two schools of thought is that nihilists believe everything is meaningless, but existentialists believe purpose can be created. So, how does this all apply to the modern day, and what is happiness? Well, I'd like to share a couple quotes that can help grant us insight into answering these questions. John Locke once said that men always forget that human happiness is a disposition of mind and not a condition of circumstances. This quote reminds us that inner peace must be achieved to exude outer peace. John Locke believes that happiness comes from within. Although some circumstances are incredibly bleak, Locke believes that happiness is an entirely mental concept. Another interesting quote I found is from Henry David Thoreau, which reads, "Happiness is like a butterfly. The more you chase it, the more it will evade you. But if you notice the other things around you, it will gently come and sit on your shoulder." Thoreau believed that one must not obsess over the pursuit of happiness, rather focus on the present moment, as that is what will lead to a happy life. When one obsesses over one thing to an excessive degree, that thing will naturally evade them. This is because frequently that one thing is the product or the end result, and not the process or the journey. I don't believe that happiness has a one-size-fits-all definition. It is a fluid concept that changes every day around the world constantly. So how can we assign one static definition? If a definition is to be assigned, it must be general and it must account for fluidity and change. I believe that happiness is a fluid concept of personal human positivity. That is the best answer I can assign to the question. Obviously, this isn't the correct answer, and I'm not nearly as knowledgeable or smart as the people who've attempted to define it that I've just talked about. And who's to say that it won't change by tomorrow or by the next hour? I believe to be truly happy, one must bypass all their prejudices and find what brings them the most joy without society or money clouding the judgment. Thank you for listening.